And then this one, I just wrote classism and Marxism. I didn't actually write out a question. So when I was getting to it, I was like, where's the question? I don't even know what I'm asking. All right, welcome back to the Jonny Random Show. This is the third segment in this series on CRT. We just got done talking about a couple of tenets and discussing those. And one thing that I want to go to next is talk about meritocracy versus structural racism or systemic racism, and talk about that for a second here. And I think a lot of this has its roots, and this is where people go into sort of like it's Marxist and all that kind of stuff with regards to like classism and things like that. So I'm going to throw out a couple thoughts and then I'll pitch it to Matt first, I think this time, since I pretty much pitched it to Paul every other time first. So do you think that we are in a more meritocracy, and do you think that that is valid, that we should be in a sort of a meritocratic system, or are to address racism and these issues? Do you think that that's what's going to take us out, or do you sort of agree with the tenet of CRT, where it is more of a structural problem that, number one, got us here, and maybe that can get us out because it's rejection of meritocracy? So go ahead, take it away.
I think it's a fool's errand to try to get rid of meritocracy, because merit implies values. And if you say that it's a value that meritocracy be gone, what you're basically saying is that system has no merit. You're using merit to try to determine what should and shouldn't be, and trying to say it's basically self-defeating. It's like trying to build a sandcastle while encouraging, like spraying it with a water gun or something. I don't know. It undermines the foundations. Meritocracy is something that we can't really do without. And that was something that was a part of original Marxism and communism. When Russia became the ideal, or the Soviet Union, I should say, became the ideal of what socialism should be, where everybody was equal. In its early days, a lot of people really believed that that's what it was becoming. They believed the propaganda. It was unchallenged. But there's no way to give individual people the same giftings. One person is able to do something that another is not. And for the system to succeed, you've got to put that person into a place that puts him or her more valued than the person who can't do said things. Merit always seemed to happen, even though the meritocracy, they tried to tear it down and say everybody's equal. Some people were more equal than others. It just came out.
Okay, so let me push back a little bit and challenge a little here. Mm-hmm. So meritocracy is, you saying, is a natural order of things. It's always going to be there, and it's good that it's there to a certain extent, because we just have to learn to deal with it, basically. Sounds like you're saying. Okay. So, but you use the word put somebody, where like everybody's different, so we got to put somebody there. So we're talking about structure, right? So mm-hmm. Structural, So do you think that that structurally the African American race in particular, maybe Native American, a couple others, have been structurally oppressed, and to correct that, we need to elevate them to their place in society, and so we have to combat these structures? So in a way, it almost sounds like you're saying you're agreeing. I don't know. Are you?
No. So in order to actually allow merit to be the factor that puts you in a place, you have to pull out the things that were stopping merit from being what it is. So the real problem, I believe, with the structure as it is that meritocracy is inhibited. Where we're seeing injustice in our society is usually where merit is not the defining factor, where people in power are keeping those with merit out of power by devious means, and systems that are built to protect the elite that maybe got there originally by merit, but like generations later, it's not by merit that they're there. So again, that's interference with meritocracy. So if you try to say that's okay, so that's evil, that's wrong, we need to destroy that, and you make everybody equal, well, then somebody ends up being more equal than another. Meritocracy ends up happening. But it doesn't, again, like, as long as people are evil, as long as evil is in people, and they refuse to acknowledge that, they're never going to have a just society. They're always going to have some form of meritocracy that is hampered by trying to figure out what it's a hampered meritocracy, we'll call it that. It's going to be hampered in some way or another. Somebody's going to be at the top. When Cuba went communist, then you had Castro and his people that, everybody believed he was going to bring, everybody up, but he brought everybody down because he was more equal than everyone else. And so many other people when that happens. So whenever people have thought that, oh, finally, we're going to get rid of the evils, and we're going to get rid of the cronies, and then we're going to have a true society of justice for all, and perhaps merit elevating us. It doesn't usually happen. America was set up on that kind of idea with liberal values instead of Marxist values, but it was set up to try to do that. But over time, whether it be banking or the banking industry or something else, that some form of monopoly was set up in order to keep merit from being the deciding factor.
Okay. Paul, what do you have to say on that? Structural racism versus meritocracy as it relates to race.
Right. I think to deny the existence of structural issues is to ignore history.
Right.
That's not to say that. Well, let me go with what I'm going to say, and then hopefully those that are listening won't imply, oh, well, you said this, so you must mean that. No. Pay attention to what I say, and I hate that I have to do this, but I have to do this so much of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention to what I say, not what I didn't say. Whataboutism is awful. But to deny that there have been structures in United States history that were racist, either overtly or covertly, intentionally or unintentionally, is to deny history. We fought a war over something about that. We had slavery in the South. We had Congress enacting laws against the specific Chinese ethnicity. We've had, and then Native Americans. We took their land. Some of it we traded for fair value. A lot of it we didn't. And then we shoved them off onto reservations that, was the worst piece of land we could put them on. And so we've got some issues in our history that some of those we haven't dealt with well. And so, yeah, there's some structural inequities that have happened that exist. Do they exist now? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not to the extent that they once did. But in terms of meritocracy, I have a preference for meritocracy, provided that those metrics are reasonable. Are you competent at what you're doing? Are you looking for more training to do more than you're doing now? What skills are you bringing to the table? If somewhere in that your question is, well, what's your ethnicity? What's your gender? What's your station in life? What's your bank account look like? Those things, that gets into the part of meritocracy where there are some problems. So in my view, meritocracy is fine insofar as it, as the metrics of the whatever, are appropriate. Race is generally not an appropriate metric. Gender is generally not an appropriate metric. There are some there's some context where you might where some preferences might be appropriate, but in terms of being able to move up in station in life, in terms of being able to increase income, in terms of what kind of, what industries you work in, no. If you're in a context where, you've got somebody who's got some trauma from childhood or something like that, and I'm thinking in a healthcare context, a patient needs care, but they don't want a male providing that care for them. They prefer a female, and because the person making the preference, say, was raped at one point. At that point, okay, yeah, it's certainly appropriate to say, okay, let's get a woman healthcare worker in here to work with this woman who's got some trauma around men. There's I can see some value to that, but as a general rule of employment, of advancement, no.
Yeah, maybe I should have phrased this question a little differently, because as we were talking, a couple things to me are popping out here. So we're talking about opportunity, right? And when we talk about this, I think that's probably where I should have directed the conversation, right? So, do you believe that people that are darker skin have the same opportunities, equal opportunities to get ahead in life, the same opportunities? So basically, as it stands, is there some structural thing that inhibits someone who's African American, Indian, Native American, whatever their ethnicity is? Is there some structural thing that's inhibiting them, or is it just based on their competency? Or if they're competent enough, they can rise to the top? Just real fast, because you guys have already pretty much answered this, I think, in a lot of ways. But I'll just go back over to Matt real quick.
So there's in-group, out-group dynamic, which is a very big component of the answer to that. So I would say in that many business cultures are not very conducive to other ways of thinking, and they're very susceptible to in-group, out-group dynamics. And that's where diversity training can help to bridge that gap. But if you start, and if by equal opportunity, you mean that those who have merit in something are allowed to do that something, perhaps maybe I would say we're probably better off now than we've ever been before. But as many times things that are intended to encourage something are actually counterproductive. If you just, let's say, pile manure all over your yard and you pile it really thick to grow your grass, you're going to have some real trouble growing your grass. You're going to kill it. Because there's a matter of measure involved. And I think a lot of times what is happening where what we've done with equal opportunity in the United States has actually been detrimental to African Americans to the point where it's actually gone the other direction. And
so another way to just add on top of that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but just to add on top of that, do you think that we should talk about the past or not talk about the past as it relates to your opportunities moving forward?
What?
Talk about it. Absolutely talk about it.
Okay.
Whose opportunities?
So let's say, to the African American community, to these minority communities, is it helpful to talk about the history of their oppression in the United States that was perpetrated by white people? Is that beneficial to moving forward, or is that something that we shouldn't be addressing so much? We need to be just focusing on, look, today's opportunity, today's a merit-based society, make every opportunity count.
Yeah, I think two things need to happen.
A little bit of both, something. What?
Both things, you need to talk about it, but you need to talk about both, because if you just talk about the things that the white people did to the black people, first of all, that's going to make them think that all white people are the same, which is not true. The American government, by a lot of American people, had duped a lot of American people into thinking that African Americans were were less than human, which is awful. You have to talk about that, but you also need to talk about the fact that many white people were not fooled by it. They saw through that. They saw through it due to the light of Scripture in their life. They saw that God created all people, and that all people came from Adam, and that because all people came from Adam, black people and white people are related. And therefore it was their brother who was out in the field being worked to death, and they didn't stand by that and do nothing. You've got to teach both sides of this. There have been awful things that African American people have done in the past as well, whether or not they felt justified in doing it, and there are awful things that Americans or white people are doing are done in the past and are doing today because they feel justified. They feel slighted. They feel like they're not getting the opportunities because black people or Hispanics are coming in and taking their jobs. The fact of the matter is there's evil in both and all times, and we need to teach it in a very balanced approach and make it both something that you understand that there's group dynamics, but there's individual responsibility. You can't make an entire race culpable for the activities of the past generations. If you happen to know that so-and-so is the grandson of some terrible person, that person needs extra help, but they're not guilty of their grandparents' sins. They may need to be pulled out of racism. They may have a tough time coming out of it, but reaching across is very important, So yeah, I mean, you've got to teach it, but balanced.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, what about that? Do you think we should teach the history and that needs to be a focus, or do we need to just talk about sort of more of the meritocracy?
As a student of history, I'm always going to go with you teach the history. Mm-hmm. You have to. You can't just go, all right, so we've got the meritocracy, we got all this other stuff. It doesn't matter. It's over. It's in the past. No, it happened. Mm-hmm. Things that happened in the Roman Empire still are showing up in our culture today, or, and Eastern Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire, some of those attitudes still show up today. How we view and interact with other people, with other cultures, that is in large part fed by how were we raised. There are some people that will break out of those out of that training and get different training. But you can't just say, hey, look, we've got the meritocracy and it's great and everybody now has equal opportunity. Structurally, those opportunities exist, but we've still got large groups of people that view other ethnicities as less than. If they don't do that intentionally, it is just part of how they've been. It is what they've seen and observed growing up, and those attitudes unintentionally carry on. So you can't get to the meritocracy before you deal with the history. And then even with the meritocracy, you still have to point to, we've gotten this far and we have this much further to go. We have to keep going.
Yeah.
We have
one. Sorry.
Go ahead.
One word. Yes or no? Should white people today apologize for what we did? The collective we, right? We went to the moon, right? We beat the Nazis. So we, right? We claimed the victories, but oh, racism, we didn't, that was by our ancestors enslaved as slaves. Should we as white people apologize to the Black and brown community for the sins that we have perpetrated upon them? Yes or no? Shout it out. Put you real Johnny on the spot.
That's not a one-word answer, because there's lots of nuance and context that has to go into that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's literally impossible.
Yeah.
Should we?
Well, that went really, really well.
Should we as a culture repent of the abuses of the past? Yeah. Should we as a culture examine, hey, how did our ancestors abuse people? I think that's useful, as long as you take from that, you go, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to have nothing to do with abusing other ethnicities. We can identify how that's happened, how our ancestors have perpetrated it, how other ancestors have perpetrated it, and repent of that. Sure, absolutely. But then, for just because this one's over abused lately in a political context, but examine the history, and then how do we do better? Part of that is repentance, and part of that is treating people better, more empathy, like Matt has said consistently, more kindness, more charity, more neighborliness.
Yeah. So I think my answer to that would be yes. Yes, I think that I can apologize for the collective we. I didn't have any personal part of that. But yeah, I think it's horrible. I think that it was done by people that are my ancestors, and they hurt other people's ancestors. And so, yeah, absolutely. I can take a little bit of ownership of that and say that's been a part of your history, and that's been a part of my history. We all got here. We all have a history. I think it is in my mind. So let's say I abuse my child, right? And they grow up, and then I don't ever talk about it, and they don't ever talk about it. And then I change, I have a changing moment of my heart, and I go and I want to love and nurture them, but I don't ever talk about it. I don't ever say, hey, I'm sorry for the wrong that I did. Mm-hmm. There cannot be restoration.
Right.
And I feel like, in a way, that's where America is. Just because right now our relationship is good. Right now, I'm the dad that's taking care of the kid, whatever, you're going through your adult life, and I'm taking care of you, and I'm acting like everything's okay, and I'm treating you well, and I'm doing all the things that I'm supposed to, and you're allowed, have all the opportunities now. But our history, I have to at least some sort of address that. Mm-hmm. Like, I think this is just my personal take, and it might be a little controversial. The fact that you guys didn't want to answer is fine. Because I think that most people don't want to answer. Most people don't want to take responsibility for something that's not theirs. And I don't want to take responsibility for something that I didn't do. I didn't do anything to anybody that was, racist, intentionally or unintentionally. And I've never done anything in my life up until this point that was intentionally racist to somebody. Now, have I, maybe done something that was unkind or stereotyped someone or whatever, all these things, yes, but it's not come from a place of hate. But I think that we can acknowledge that 60 years ago in the civil, African Americans had separate but equal, right? When we finally got rid of that nonsense, you couldn't eat in the same restaurant. Your kids couldn't, play games with other, we were segregated society. This is absolutely horrible, horrifying. These are atrocities. They're all of it. And so, that's how I would answer that. And then going back to circling back around on Marxism, where it came from, and I think
I
that.
answer that.
Go
I did
ahead.
want to answer that. So,
Go ahead.
I've been asked before, like, did you not hear me or are you stupid? And the answer to that question is not no or yes, because they're not related. And I think that's the problem that we're looking at here, is that an apology is not a solution. And I don't think it's really viewed as a solution. So a real reconciliation with the African American communities over this issue is not going to be whether we give an apology collectively. That's going to be meaningless. I really, that's the reason I think that they couldn't answer the question. I would gladly apologize if I thought it was going to be meaningful. But it's not. It's a too little, too late.
To me, it's like when a parent says, "Hey, say sorry to your brother." The parent didn't see what happened. You maybe didn't do anything wrong. And they say, "Hey, apologize anyway." It's not going to hurt. It's going to make them feel better. Not going to hurt you. It's just saying the right thing because it's the right attitude. It's the attitude of your heart. It's like, how do I address my brother and sister? You were hurt. You were wronged. There's nobody right now that is existing. Maybe there are people that are still alive that were a part of, some of this problems, as far as policy wise, whatever. But no, the vast majority didn't do anything, and, there are racist people obviously right now, but currently, so,
right. But
I think that, you're saying that it's not related and it's not going to help. It's not going to be, so you're not, don't feel obligated to do it. Well,
I feel like that would be letting myself off the hook. If I feel like I've done the right thing by apologizing, and it's more likely to let myself off the hook. The thing about it is I have a responsibility to my brother when I see them struggling, and that responsibility is there whether or not I accept responsibility for my grandparents wronging them. Which in my case, I have maybe perhaps a great grandparent who was involved in that, and I have no idea, what. Yeah, I have no idea to what level, but like the majority of our ancestors probably were Germans up in Ohio that had nothing to do with slavery, maybe racism, but nothing to do with slavery. So, I mean, that is, it's really hard to determine even who had guilt. There are people who have come over from Italy and Ireland since the Civil War who had nothing to do with any of that.
I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about. Not necessarily about the Civil War. I'm talking about up through like Jim Crow, up through these.
Well, that's
till
true,
the 1960s and 70s. I mean, like we have ancestors that were living in America. How did they lift hands? Were they out protesting? Were they out trying to get the equality for their brothers and sisters, their black brothers and sisters? When the redlining happened and your real estate license was revoked, if you tried to have a family move into a white neighborhood, a black family move into a white neighborhood, you get your license revoked. And we're talking about in the 50s and 60s and 70s here. Like, that is not too distant future. That is a large majority of our parents and their parents that had to deal with these issues. This isn't some far removed issue. And we are talking about structural problems. And when we don't call the structure, out for what it did, I think that we are not, it's ignoring something that happened to somebody. Somebody was victimized here for generation upon generation upon generation. And for us to just ignore it, I think is hurtful. And so at the very least, we can stop ignoring it.
Yeah.
At the very least, we can apologize for not caring about it at all, not caring about you and what you went through and the hurt that you went through. And so to a certain extent, I feel like we can apologize, just to push back a little bit, because I get your point, and I totally get your point. And I'm just trying to have a little bit of tension here. So, keeps the episodes spicy. So, but yeah, so let's let's wrap that up. And then the last question, unless anybody has any final thoughts on that before we're going to go to a quick little break, and then we're going to roll out with the last question, our final segment on is CRT good or bad?